We have a lot of Legos at our house. We got them all as our boys were growing up, and often, most of the time, they came in a set. And that set was meant to build like a truck or a building or a plane. And all of those sets come with very specific instructions. You open up the little instruction book and it tells you, say, to grab a little orange or red flat square piece and take this other piece and attach it right where you're supposed to attach it. And if you follow these instructions carefully, eventually you can get to building some pretty complicated Lego toys. We had one that was an X-Wing fighter and the wings moved up and down because it had little gears inside there, provided you followed the instructions well, all of that would work. Now when I was a kid, when we first got our first Legos, there weren't any instructions, it was just a box of Legos. So you had to use your imagination perhaps to create some things, or you could look at something as a model. Say like a fire truck, and say, I can see what a fire truck looks like, so I'm going to try to make something that looks like a fire truck. Now as our boys were playing with Legos, you learn, you build up skill as you go along. And our older one came home at one point, he had done some research and found that it wasn't made by Lego, but it was a set that someone else had created from Legos that you could buy. And it was like a Saigon street corner from the Vietnam era. And it was really expensive. He said, I want that. And so instead, I gave him a World War II coffee table book with lots of pictures in it. And I came home from work that day, and he had made a German Panzer tank and a P-51 Mustang airplane. His skill had gotten to the point where he didn't need all those directions. He could just look at something and then make that thing because he had this model to look at. Today we get to the 9th chapter of Romans as we're journeying along through this summer, and we find that Paul has a sorrowful heart. He is really sad, it sounds like, and the reason he is sad is because the Hebrew people that he comes from do not know Jesus the way he does. He was, remember, a persecutor of the church, and there's a point where he describes himself as kind of the super Hebrew, the Pharisee that knows all the law and follows it all perfectly, but he has this encounter with Jesus that changes his life totally. And so he has had this experience, he has this new faith and this new understanding of life and grace and forgiveness, and all of the people that he grew up with don't have that. And so he has this sadness that they don't have this same relationship with Jesus that he does, that they don't understand Jesus the way he does. And I think this raises some great questions for us to say, how do we then as people, because Paul was having to figure this out, how do we relate to people who don't understand Jesus the way we do? And that's really can be a big question, because you could even just start with our Christian brothers and sisters who we sometimes disagree with on how we understand who Jesus is and what he calls us to. But like Paul, he was a Hebrew, so he was looking at his Jewish brothers and sisters and sad because they didn't know Jesus. But we have Jewish neighbors, we have Muslim neighbors, we have Hindu neighbors and Buddhist neighbors and atheist neighbors. We got all kinds of people that we live amongst and around who don't understand Jesus the way we do and who don't believe the way we believe. And you can even get outside of faith and just say, how do we get along with people who don't understand the world the way we do? Whose parenting styles are different than ours, or who understand finances or politics, or just fill in whatever ways that we live in the world. How do we get along with people who believe differently about Jesus or believe differently about the world than we do? Now we have a general pattern that we usually follow when it comes to people that are different from us. I remember our senior year, I think when we got back to the seminary, there was a white squirrel. It had red eyes, it was a little bit bigger than your average squirrel, and it lived amongst the trees in our courtyard. Now, sometimes it would just be out there and that'd be the only squirrel you would see. But if other squirrels were around, what do you suppose they did? They chased it off. They would gang up and chase it away. They looked at this other squirrel and somehow they knew, like for us they're all squirrels, that one's a different color, but they all just are squirrels. But for the squirrels, this other squirrel was somehow different and somehow a threat. So they would chase that squirrel away. And sometimes as people, I think when we encounter those who are different from us, our first thing is to feel threatened and to want to chase them away. And if you just look across the globe where we have conflict that is raging right now, so often it is between groups of people who come from different tribes or different ethnicity or different religions. And then this conflict arises because we can't somehow live with that difference, and the best option we have is to resort to violence and trying to chase those people away. More often though, I think it is much easier for us, rather than going immediately to the violence and the chasing people away, is that we just settle into the people we're comfortable with. We see people that are like us. If we're in a place and there's a bunch of people, we gravitate toward those who have things in common with us, and we settle into those little groups. And then there are people that are outside of that group. And when we have people that are outside of those groups, it's easy for us not to intermingle with them and not to listen to their stories and understand who they are. And if we can keep those people far enough away, they don't have to really be people. They can just be groups that we put labels on. And as soon as they're groups that we can put labels on and we're just enough distance from them, that's when it gets easier to start treating people in inhumane ways, because we don't think of them as fully human. We can chase them off and be mean to them. But this happens every day. We rode to confirmation camp with 9 kids in a van, 2 of which came from a different congregation. If you plopped them in the midst of us here, you wouldn't know any different. But those 2 sat in the middle, surrounded by our kids, and for like the whole 10-hour drive up, they didn't really intermingle, because they didn't know each other. And so the comfortable thing to do was for those 2 to kind of hunker down in the middle, and for ours to just kind of settle in to the conversations that they're used to having. So it's not always like devious that we end up in these places, but we end up in these spots where people that are different from us just make us uncomfortable, and so we end up pushing them away, even if it's just out of our own sense of being comfortable where we are. So when you ask the question, how are we going to relate to people that have drastically different views from us? How are we going to relate to people who believe differently about Jesus than us? It can be really challenging when we think of those other people as totally different, and we just want to be in those places of comfort. But Paul keeps going in this story, right? He says at the first, I'm really sad, but then he gives us a model of how it is that we might interact with people that are different from us. He says, I'm really sad for all these Hebrew people. If I could, I would cut myself off from Jesus and be accursed so they all could be connected to Jesus. But he knows he can't do that, because Jesus is the one that died and was raised for all of us to give us life. He can't do that again, and he can't do that at all because he's not God. So he gets that, but then he turns around, and what he does is he looks into the Hebrew people and starts to lift up blessing. He says, in fact, these are the people who received worship. They're the ones who were given the covenant. They were the ones who were given the promise. They were the ones who were given the patriarchs. They were the ones from whom Jesus came. So Paul looks at this group of people that he's sad that they don't know Jesus the way he does, but then he looks and finds God amongst them, and promise amongst them, and life amongst them. And so in all of that, he'll keep going in Romans. He takes and looks for blessing and looks for God present amongst these people that don't understand Jesus the way he does. Now, did Paul come up with all this on his own? Where did he learn it from? Standard Children's Sermon answer. Jesus. This is exactly what Jesus did. If you read through the New Testament, you see Jesus encountering all sorts of people who don't believe or understand the world the same way he does. There's a Roman centurion who is the empire, the occupier. He sends somebody that says, hey, Jesus, come heal my kid. And Jesus said, oh, your faith has made your kid well. He doesn't have to have a debate with him and say, well, do you understand who I am? And do you understand all the theology? Can you go write a paper about it and come back and pass a test? And then I'll heal your kid. He doesn't do all of that. He just says, yes, your faith has made you well. He goes about and he encounters people from different ethnicities. And when they say, Lord, have mercy, what does he do? He has mercy. He doesn't sit down and say, well, wait a minute, you're kind of across the line. There is that one story where a woman says, you know, Jesus help, and he says, I came for the children of Israel. And she says, yes, but even the dogs get the scraps. And Jesus goes, okay, right? Like he gets it. Then there's the story of the Good Samaritan. Is the Samaritan part of the Hebrew people? No. The hero of the story is somebody that comes from a totally different ethnicity who understands God in a little bit of a different way. So Jesus walks around the world and models all of this stuff. But not only does he model it, he gives us some very specific directions. Back to the Lego idea, right? When you first start, you got to follow the directions. What are we supposed to do if we see somebody hungry? Naked? Thirsty? In prison? His death. Jesus tells us all of this stuff. It's very specific, not always easy to do, but very simple to understand. If a person's hungry, give them food. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. What are we supposed to do if someone harms us in some way? Turn the other cheek, forgive them, right? So Jesus gives us a very specific list of things, this very specific sort of understandings of how it is that we can live in the world. And all of those things apply to our neighbor, which is the question of the Good Samaritan. They say, who is our neighbor? And Jesus says, well, who is the neighbor to the guy in the ditch? And the guy says, well, the one that helped him. So we get these very specific things, but then we also get just a bigger model. We get this bigger model, like once you've mastered the basics of just helping your neighbor, the bigger model is how do you just live with love in the world? And that is not always an easy thing to do. Sometimes loving your neighbor means having some tough love that calls them to accountability for the behavior that they have. Sometimes it means having a different kind of compassion. And that's where Paul then gives us a great window into how we might do that. And that window is to look at other human beings as beloved children of God, and then try to find some level of blessing in them and see where God might be at work in their life. And this then we can apply to people we disagree with on all kinds of things, whether it's politics or child rearing or even faith. We, over the time that I've been here, have been able to get to know the imam down the street, and we've had lots of interactions with the people at the Islamic Center of Orlando. And as we do that, it's been amazing to kind of learn from one another. And one of the things that has been great for me is to listen to them talk about Ramadan. So Ramadan is this long season of fasting, not unlike Lent. And when we think about Lent, if I said, what is our primary mood during Lent, what would you say that is? Penitence? Sorrowful? Like, are we really joyful and happy during Lent? No, we kind of take on this really gloomy air, and then we say, oh, I'm giving something up for Lent, and it's going to be so long, and when can I eat cheese again, or start drinking soda again? I've talked to people about Ramadan, and the word they always use is the word beautiful. They talk about this long season of fasting, and they talk about it being beautiful. And that has totally changed my understanding of Lent in a lot of ways. Not that we should give up the penitential part of it, not that we should stop giving stuff up or anything, but it's to come at it and understand that it can be a beautiful encounter with God that we have through that season. Now, I learned that from someone who doesn't understand Jesus the way that I do, who has a different understanding of who God is, but lives in that place. Now, I didn't go into that necessarily as clearly as Paul seems to in being able to look for blessing, but that is what Paul models for us. And so as we gather in this place and we sing songs and pray about Jesus, and then we get sent into the world, we have a Jesus who died for us and set us free so that we don't have to go out there with rules and all kinds of trying to keep people in line and keep people separate. But he modeled for us that all people are people, that all people belong to God. And at the end of that passage, that's what Paul says, God is the God of everything. And so we are blessed to go with a different kind of looking, to look to see where God is at work, to look for blessing in the world, to celebrate that when we see it, learn from it when we can, and trust that in the end Jesus is carrying all of us into a great space of life that is lived in its fullest as we go. Amen.